Hi, I'm Molly Barnes. My guest today is William Mathews. Actually, he came into fine art through the back door, although he went to Carnegie Tech. He has been a stage designer as well as a set designer for television. In fact, he's won a number of awards. But now he's here in a new role as a fine artist, and an amazing one at that. Hi.
Hi, Molly.
William, it is so good to see your work. Can you explain what we've just seen?
Yes, it's an installation that I am doing in my studio along with another artist, Ina Folsom. But mainly my work is based on the poetry of the Chilean poet Pablo Neruda, who won the Nobel Prize for Poetry in 1973. And I first discovered Neruda actually through a film called Il Postino. And I didn't know much about Neruda, and I went out and read some books about him and found that we had a lot in common in that he loved things. And as a stage designer, I had always used collage in my stage sets and worked with chairs and tables and various elements. And he had written a book of odes called Ode to Things, Odes las Cosas in Spanish. And he wrote various odes on ode to a table, ode to a chair. For instance, to him, a chair was a symbol of peace. So I used that as a springboard, and using my theatrical and film art direction background, created 36 pieces for this gallery of functional art in Santa Monica called the Gallery of Functional Art, curated by Lois Lambert.
They say at the end of each century or each millennium that people go back to found objects. We look at Ed Kienholz or Joseph Cornell or Michael McMillan, and we see this real fascination with handmade objects or factory-made objects, because we're going into sort of scary new ground with the computer age and the information age. Well, how do you find your material that you put into your art?
Well, I often say that I rescue pieces off the streets.
Do you really? In Los Angeles or New York?
Well, in Los Angeles, and I'm living in Long Beach right now. But many of my pieces, like I have 2 doors that I found on the streets that were being thrown out, and I used the doors as drawing to draw on, and using each panel as a way to draw. I found a lot of bottles. I started off with bottles, recycling bottles, because I loved still life, and in the bottle I saw this image that I like to repeat. I ended up putting it in the Neruda collection because...
Well, I noticed that, for example, Louise Nevelson, whose work we all know, would paint, she'd put everything up and then paint everything either white or black, and you've done that too. You've taken objects and then removed their personality by painting over.
Yes, I had a few specific pieces that were not white, but within this framework, which I am calling kind of a metaphor for the world, but it's a house and a boat, perhaps a box. And I painted that all white because I had run across a poem by Neruda about laundry. Actually, he loved the iron, and one of his lines was that poetry is pure white. So I thought of it, all the pieces that I had, that my fishnet, my shipwreck as I call it, had caught, were all kind of pure, and that giving them a sense of white
Is that a politically incorrect statement?
Well, I don't think so. I hope not. I think white in the sense of idealism, and the fact that when you wash something and it comes clean, out of which there's a sense of good.
William, tell us how you got started. You went to Carnegie Tech. You were from Ohio, is that correct?
Yes, actually, I got started in the theater in high school and in Pennsylvania, and I got
Were your mother or father in show business?
My father was a musician. He was a drummer.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And my grandmother was a singer on the stage. And anyway, I got started in the theater in high school, and then I won a scholarship to Bowling Green State University and got started in the theater. And because I loved art and I was good at making things, I ended up building sets. And then I went from there to a place called Totem Pole Playhouse, which was run by this man who's a producer, and his wife was Jean Stapleton. So I ended up doing a little bit of acting. But
who was that, Jean Sachs?
Jean Stapleton. She was in
Oh,
All
I know
in the
who she
Family,
was.
Yeah.
But who was her husband?
William Putch, Bill Putch.
I remember that
And
name.
he went to Carnegie, and in fact, he was instrumental in getting me to go to Carnegie when I was working for him. And so I went to Carnegie after Totem Pole, and slowly but surely I started doing a little work for television. And
Did you ever do any Broadway shows?
I did an off-Broadway show called Moon Children.
What's the difference between designing for television and the stage?
Well, the difference mainly is that I think that television is more realistic generally, although I think if you were doing something based on poetry, there's a little more freedom. But particularly film, which I work in, the emphasis for the art director is usually on color and line through architecture, where in film or for stage, you can be more abstract. For instance, I did a huge collage for a Ford Foundation project in Connecticut for Stage West on Sacco and Vanzante. And I had this huge collage that in the end lit up like an electrocution. It was very powerful. But it's hard to do that in film because people expect real things.
One of the most famous political cartoons about Sacco and Vanzante, I can't remember the artist, everybody would call in, but I think that's amazing. When you start to do a set for the theater, how do you go about it? Do you talk to people? Do you find out the director's idea, or do you just kind of go off on your own?
Well, to use that Sacco and Vanzetti story, I had done a collage for a group of people to raise money for the small group at Mount Holyoke. I was on the faculty at Mount Holyoke College teaching theater. And the producer saw it the Friday, and he had just wanted to replace his designer, and he called me and he said, "Bill, I need something by Monday." And he gave me a script, and it had like 50 scenes in it, which is quite complicated for stage. So I thought about it, I read the script, and since it was all about a trial, basically, and about these men being in prison, I came up with the idea of making like a steel floor and this big collage in the background, which we projected the headlines of the news about the trial. And as the trial progressed, you saw these images from the newspaper, and then the actors would actually move the sets around. So everything happened in front of you, and it wasn't trying to fool anybody. And but theater can be that exciting. And
have you ever gotten an award of any kind?
Yes, I was part of a group that got the Emmy for Thornbirds.
Really?
Yes.
Fantastic. I got an Emmy once for this, for doing art reporting.
Oh, great.
Now, what was the most difficult thing about that, about the Thornbirds?
Well, the idea, the Thornbirds, when we first started the project, I think Robert Redford and a number of people had the project and tried to do it as a feature. And the problem was to compact the story into 3 hours. It was impossible. But they had gone to Australia and New Zealand, and they had incredible research, and we had the photographs. So we literally, the hardest part was we created Drogheda, which was this wonderful farm in Australia, ranch. And in Simi Valley, we made the whole exterior, the sheep ranch, the sheep barn.
You're kidding.
The house and everything. And when you watch it, people say, "Oh my God, you went to Australia to do that," and we didn't. There was one little scene filmed with in Hawaii on a beach, and other than that, it was all done here.
Have you ever done a show and then suddenly realized when you saw it that there was something that told you exactly where you were, some mistake, something that was put in that shouldn't have been, like a flagpole? Or
Oh yeah, I remember I did a project, a period film called Marrying Man with Alec Baldwin, Kim Basinger, and it was very strictly period. It was supposed to be Las Vegas in 47 through 53. And we used a home in Beverly Hills, and there was a scene where I'm very particular as an art director, and we combed it, we rehearsed it. I'm watching the dailies, and I look up, and there's a scene from the floor up, and I see the smoke alarm. And I went crazy. I thought, oh my God. But those things happen, you know. You have to be really careful about every little detail.
My favorite designer, stage designer, was Joe Malziner. Did you ever meet him?
I met him, actually. I had a wonderful conversation with him when I was in college at Carnegie Tech. I was working at the time for one of our faculty members, Ward Baker, who directed the Fantastics. And Ward knew Joel because he had designed for Ward the Crucible, that was a very famous production. And so I went to meet Joel, and he told me the most important thing for anybody to do was to draw, to learn to draw. And at that time, he looked at my drawings, and he didn't really say they weren't good, but he said, work on your drawing, it's very important. But I thought that was wonderful.
So many art schools today do not emphasize drawing or painting. It's all about thinking and all about the way of relating to art by thinking, by changing your thinking, which I think is a shame in some ways, because I think drawing is so important.
It's funny, for me, drawing leads to thinking, and drawing pays off later on. It's almost like a daily exercise. If you didn't go to the gym and work out with your body, your mind doesn't work as well. And I think by drawing, you're using your right brain, and things occur to me, even in the studio, when I'm hanging things or dressing my sets, I call them, my installations, something will come back to me that I've done under drawing that really ignites the present that I'm working in.
There's a psychiatrist here on the West Coast, Ed Wirtz, and every artist I've known, probably with the exception of you, has been there because they've had blocks. They have not been able to paint. And what he does is he says, go into your studio and paint 8 socially unredeemable paintings with no idea of showing them, no idea of style, just get out what you're feeling. Then he says, take a yellow pad and write down all the negatives, all the voices in your head that are saying, you can't be a painter, this isn't serious work, your mother's speaking, your father's saying, I want you to be an architect, or I wanted you to be something else. And then he has, actually, I mean, this sounds a little crazy, but then he sets it to music. He has you set all the negatives into an opera, and that way relieve you of all this tension that comes with not being able to actually get down and concentrate on painting.
That's wonderful. When you mentioned starting with blank canvases, one thing I've never had a problem with, I guess, with the Neruda is there's over 50 books of poetry, and I'm never faced with a blank canvas. I can go to a poem and it's something. It reminds me of a script, very much like I was trained to design from a script. And in fact, one of my teachers said, we quoted a famous designer, Donald Onslager, who taught at Yale, and he used to say that the script is its own designer. So I feel that within the script and within this poem, it designs itself, and that it's there for you.
Well, the thing I really should ask you about is, how did you become an artist? How did you go from this discipline of the stage and become a solo artist?
Well, when I wanted to become a stage designer, I read a lot about the art of being a stage designer. So I think
who wrote books on things like that?
Robert Edmund Jones was one of the first people to write this wonderful book called The Dramatic Imagination, which when I taught theater design, I recommended it. And it was a beautiful thing where he talked about when the old days he would have these scenic artists paint the backings for him. And he would take them a bottle of wine and a rose and say, that's the color I want in that painting. And there was an art to it. There was the kind of dramatic imagination that conjured up the beauty of what the play was about. But I've always thought of it as an art, the art of stage design, and it is the same with, I believe, film design as well, and television design.
Was there a moment when you said, I want to be a fine artist?
Well, what happened as my training at Carnegie, I started off, there's a full year of fine arts training with the regular artists. You have drawing and two-dimensional design and painting. And then you go into more of an architectural training and the stage design. But I was always doing watercolors, and I felt after 20 years a little frustrated about that. So I thought, well, I want to go bigger. I want to do my own. And in the film and TV, you're working with a producer. And here I was in art, as an artist, I was my own producer and own director. So that was kind of fun to try that.
When I put down showbiz magazines and decided to become an artist and then an art dealer full time, I remember I found that the personalities of actors are very similar to painters, except that there's nowhere to hide if you're an actor. It's all going back to your own body. Whereas with a painter, you can argue about style, you can argue about technique, and you don't really get as hurt. But there's a very strong similarity, I think, in character traits.
Very much, and one of the things I think you feel like you're putting everything out on your sleeve.
Exactly.
And you know, you don't start feeling it until the night before your show, your art exhibit, and you feel, everything I've done on this page or this work is telling somebody what I am, and it's pretty difficult, you know.
Who's your favorite artist?
I like, my favorite artist, I like the Kienholzes quite a bit. My favorite, I guess, would be Cézanne as a classic artist. I also like Cy Twombly quite a bit. I really love his work. I feel some kind of close...
I knew him.
You did?
I did, yeah. We were out in East Hampton. And the trouble with owning a Cy Twombly is that the maids, or if you have a cleaning woman, they often tend to just think it's, you know, junk.
Scribble,
yeah. Why did you like Kienholz? It's interesting because he always thought in black and white. Everything was right or wrong. There was no in the middle.
Well, I suppose I was attracted to it first with the theatricality of it. The
Absolutely.
Stage, their little vignettes, they called them, where they... And when I was in school, we were very much against the Vietnam War, and I felt that his pieces on the Vietnam War were very strong. And you know, that's where art and politics really can make a strong... He made some strong statements that I think were really good.
When you're going to a collector, let's say, what is it you want them to feel? An emotional response or an intellectual response, a rational response? What is it you hope for?
I hope that they see something that I haven't seen that's probably better than I expected.
That's not the right answer.
No, I don't know. I think that I do want them to see what I've been trying to say.
Yeah. But is emotionalism important to you?
I can't say. I don't. I suppose it is.
Tell me about this piece. I'd like to buy that. Did
Well,
you find the frame or did you have it done?
No,
too?
I found this. I bought this frame. It's made of old wood, but the point of the frames and all of these pieces, I did my new collages. I'm calling them the notebook series, because I got these wallpaper samples in a notebook that are used. We as art directors use them as samples to pick out art papers for our movies. And so I started keeping them, and what I like to do is paint on the paper, then scrape it, and I hang it up on clothespins, let it dry, and then I come back and I tear it and make some image. And this particular image was Ode to the Artichoke, and Neruda talks about the artichoke being like this strong, kind of inarmored plant. And the other thing I did with this whole notebook series is I used old frames, and I like the idea of the frame coming into the piece as being a part of the piece. Kind of like Japanese architecture, where you go from the inside to the outside, and they're all combined.
In the old days, well, let's say before 1914 or 1920, artists always took you into the frame in a Renaissance technique. There would be a Renaissance perspective, a horizon line, and everything in the frame was geared toward that. And then when the abstract expressionist painters came out, they wanted everything to come out into the room. So not only did they eliminate frames, but they had cool colors in front of warm colors, which pushed everything out into the room. And painting on a large scale, it made the painting so important into the room. You go into a Sam Francis, a room that has Sam Francis, it's almost as if you're an addendum to the paintings themselves.
Yeah, but I suppose somewhere the frame starts. It's either the studio or whatever. But I did see a funny note once that David Hockney had put around a frame. He had seen little notes that, let me out,
No.
to the artwork, which I think about. But here I think of it more as a total piece.
And what about the one below?
This is a piece that I did on Ode to the Scissors. And again, it's a functional piece where one side has written in the poem, a part of the poem, and the other side has a pair of really good scissors that work well. And these are I call them the Tengo scissors. But Neruda described them as birds and fish. He loved the shape of them. And again, the fact that they were for the hands, the human hands.
What's your favorite gallery in Los Angeles?
I really like the LA Louvre, maybe because I just recently saw the Kienholz's show there. And there's a lot of good galleries, I think, at the Bergamot Station where you can drive in and see several
Do you like
things.
that? Art is
Yes.
spoken here.
Yes, I've actually had 2 shows there, and I really like the climate there.
Do you find showing in a functional art gallery that the prices are cheaper than when you show in a fine art gallery?
Well, since I've really been doing my art for the last only 5 or 6 years, I consider myself as an emerging artist. You do have to start somewhere. But I felt that the prices are probably more equated with furniture. Like, in other words, if you have a table up to $5,000, where some paintings go obviously for a lot more. But because it's functional, I think people wanted to keep it within the appliance kind of idea, I guess.
You've never been to George Herm's studio, but his is very similar to yours in that everything is fodder for art. And also he breaks up his studio by having tents and by having special little room dividers that take you into an environment. You're part of the magic of his creativity.
Yeah, that I could identify with.
Now, I saw in your studio a kind of environment that was filled with not only poetry, but all kinds of found objects. How do you start something like that? Do you work from a blueprint? Do you work from a plan?
Well, I did do some sketches. I was thinking of, actually, there's a museum in Long Beach called the Museum of Latin American Art, and I recently applied for a grant through them, but I was thinking of them in terms of trying to present the poetry of Neruda to an uninformed audience.
That would be extraordinary.
And
did they go for it?
They loved the idea. We're just waiting to hear about the grant.
What a great idea.
Yeah.
Because the new art market now is definitely Latin American and South American art.
And coming from teaching, there's something that I feel like I love to tell people about Neruda, and using my art helps explain it. So that was the idea, to set this up based on the poetry as kind of a boat. And you could see the shape of a boat, and within this boat is various facets of a home, of a house, of rooms. Like Neruda, I would still want to do the bedroom. He talks about the bed as a place where you're born, you make love, and you die. It's a beautiful place.
Were you a pal of Diego Rivera's? I don't mean a pal, but emotionally a pal?
Yes, and more recently I've discovered him, and I really love his work. I really do. And I was just down in Mexico, in Mexico City, saw the murals there in Thanksgiving, and they were really moving, gorgeous. The colors are so amazing to me.
And his wife, Frida Kahlo, who's been such an influence, particularly on young women.
Very much so. We went to her house as well in Mexico City.
Really? What was that like?
Oh, it's fabulous. Diego had designed his house with her studio, but then she had her own place, which is much larger, and it's remarkable. Yeah.
How do you set up a day? How do you work? Do you work during the day as
I like setting up the day for my art as a work day, believe it or not. Like, going for a jog or a walk, coffee at the Rose Cafe, whatever, and then heading to the studio from mainly 9 to 5, because I find that the light is, after that, the light goes away. I have skylights, and I find that natural light is like my energy. It's the best time to work.
When I first got turned on to modern art in the 60s, I was so excited when I discovered the idea of figure grounding, the idea that the environment or the background was as important as the subject, and also the idea that you could look through a piece of sculpture like a David Smith and get the environment as part of the art piece. That kind of changed my life. Have you had a similar experience to that?
Yes, I think the environment is really important. I know my studio where I work that you saw today is actually a Japanese nursery prior to being a studio. So when you come there, you feel like you're in a garden, and that, I don't know, I love Monet, and I think of the garden in that respect. There's something wonderful when I open the door and I feel that green outside that really helps my work.
Do you believe in God?
Yes, I believe in a power larger than us, and I'm still searching for that definition of God, but I believe there's something.
Do you believe that museums have replaced the church?
No, I don't, but I think that there is kind of a religious experience, definitely, for me, and when I go to see certain art.
I think that the morality that goes along with most of the artists I know seems much closer to religion than anything else I've known.
That's true. I think even like with poetry, that Neruda was striving for the truth, and it was so important. And that's what really art is about, the truth of something, about finding the inner essence of it.
So what's next for you? What do you want to do next?
Well, actually, Lois Lambert asked me to do a show, and I'm going to do it a year from September on Shakespeare. So it'll be on the functional, kind of partly functional art of Shakespeare.
How will you do that?
Well, within the gallery, we're going to create a playing space, part of the theater, and then I will use a lot of my theater ideas to make some paintings and artists.
For example?
Oh, for instance, I love scenic backgrounds or painted backings, that kind of thing. And then I can think of this wonderful Jacobean chair, which will be fun to do, and some games based on Shakespeare and the plays.
So you actually believe there was a Shakespeare, not a Marlowe that wrote all the
I don't think it was
plays.
Marlowe. I'm not sure. I just started reading this new book on Shakespeare that's just, this man thinks, and I can't remember the writer's name, you might know, but he thinks that Shakespeare is probably the creator of it. I mean, his ideas are so astounding when you think about them. They're just so broad and so, I mean, for Freud and all of that.
William Mathews, thank you so much for coming today. This has really been a treat, and I love the idea of the two disciplines and how you're encouraging in yourself that need for both.
Well, thank you, Molly.
Art is not for everyone. It never has been, it never will be, but for those of you who love it like we do, we want to turn you on. I'm Molly Barnes.